Okay, Shavua Tov, everyone. We are coming to the end of David and Goliath's story. And we left it off last week with an interesting question about why Shaul was chosen in the first place, given yesterday's parsha of Vayechi, wherein Yehuda, the tribe of Yehuda, is told clearly that the kings will come from him. The scepter shall not be removed from Yehuda. So I think it was Barbara who asked the question, how come Shaul was chosen in the first place? And David Marks told us that the Ramban on yesterday's parsha, I went into that in some detail, and I'm hoping that he's going to tell us about that Ramban now to start off the shiur. Are you with us, David?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, so the question was, David, how come Shaul got the job in the first place?
Okay. Fascinating Ramban. Thanks for the time here, Johnny. This Ramban is quite long, and it's a history lesson that encompasses thousands of years of Jewish history, which I said also was tied into Hanukkah when you were last giving the Tanakh shir. So if you allow me just to go through the Ramban, to go through it quickly with the other aspects that he brings into interpreting this pasuk, that the kingship won't go to any other tribe.
Let me stop you there for a sec, David. Well, let me get the pasuk on the screen, and then we can talk about it with it on the screen. It's chapter 48, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, 48:10.
There we go, 48:10. I'll put it on the screen for you, and then maybe Jeffrey can give us the rendition, and then you can tell us what the Ramban says. There we are, Jeffrey. All yours. You're muted, Jeff. You're muted. You're still muted.
Sorry. Okay. Now Israel's eyes had become heavy with age to the extent that he could not see. So he drew them near to him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph,
Sorry, Jeffrey, it's 49:10.
Sorry, thought that's Ephraim and Manasseh. I thought you were going to tell us something about that as well.
No,
okay.
49.
49:10. There it is on the screen now.
Okay. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the student of the law from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him will be a gathering of peoples.
Okay, right. David, all yours.
Okay, so you could spend 6 months trying to interpret this pasuk, what it means. It's one of the most difficult pasukim in the whole of Tanakh to understand. And the Ramban starts his commentary on discussing the Christian interpretation of the verse, Shiloh referring to their Mashiach, and in particular, we're looking at the disputation he has in Barcelona in 1263, when he ends up being expelled from Spain over this confrontation with the Christians over the interpretation of Mashiach. According to the Christian view, Shiloh is Mashiach, their Mashiach. The derivation of the word Shiloh is from a word we find in the Tochacha in Devarim, Shilyata. Shilya is a fetus. So therefore, it refers to some future descendant. And this is both an accepted Hebrew interpretation as well, Jewish interpretation as well. For the Christians, there will only be rulership from the Davidic line until their Messiah comes. And interestingly, the gematria of the word Mashiach is the same as the gematria of the word Shiloh. By the way, it's also the gematria of the word Moshe, but let's not go down there. So the Ramban, first of all, refutes the Christian interpretation of this verse by saying there's many, many periods throughout Jewish history where there, A, wasn't a king, and B, there wasn't a king that came from the house of David, from Judah. His interpretation, again accepting the word Shiloh as being his son, is that once Yehuda's descendant David arrives, no other tribe will be allowed to rule over Israel. And we'll see the exceptions to that later on in the Ramban.
Can I ask a question on that straight away?
Sure.
The pasuk says ad ki yavo Shiloh, until it comes to Shiloh, not from when it comes to. From that interpretation would make sense if it had said the scepter shall not depart from Judah from the time when Shiloh comes.
And that's one of the ways of translating ad ki yavo Shiloh, until David comes. So once David comes, then there'll be no longer kings from any other tribe than Judah. The Rashbam, on the other hand, translates it more literally, according to you, that he refers to Shiloh as being Shechem. And of course, Shiloh is nowhere near Shechem. It's several kilometers away from Shechem. And he talks about Shiloh being the place that the kingship was removed from Yehuda at the time when Yeravam ben Nevat was made king over the northern kingdom. So the time of the division of the kingdom. We'll come back to that in a minute, because Ramban will look into that and dismiss the Rashbam's interpretation. So Ramban himself, his own interpretation of this verse is, once Shiloh arrives, i.e. David HaMelech, no other tribe will rule over Israel. Then he looks at Ibn Ezra's interpretation of the verse. For Ibn Ezra has a problem, as we all have. What about before David HaMelech? What about Shaul? What about even before Shaul? And according to Ibn Ezra, the pasuk isn't referring to kingship. It's referring to leadership or preeminence. And according to Ibn Ezra, Yehuda, mainly as a result of his actions in last week's parasha in Vayigash, he assumes the position of preeminence, and he acquires that position from the rejection of Yaakov's first three sons, Reuven, Levi, and Shimon. According to Targum Onkelos, Reuven should have got the Bechor. He should have had the firstborn rights. He also should have had the rights of Kohen, and he should have also had the rights of kingship. And because of his character traits, he lost all three. Kingship going to Yehuda as a result of Yehuda's actions in the beginning of Vayigash. We'll come back to that shortly as well. So Ibn Ezra's interpretation of the verse is nothing to do with Malchut, it's to do with preeminence. Yehuda, as a result of his doing teshuvah as a result of his positive actions, he's granted a position of preeminence. And we note several things in Chumash and Tanakh which proves his preeminence. First of all, in last week's parsha, when Bnei Israel go down to Egypt with Yaakov, before Yaakov goes, he sends an emissary, Yehuda. And the Mefarshim say, why did he send Yehuda first? To set up a yeshiva in Goshen, so that there'll be continuous learning. So it's Yehuda that's given that preeminence. We know, for example, that the first tribe to jump into Yam Suf was Yehuda, led by Nachshon ben Aminadav. It showed their preeminence. It showed whilst everyone else was afraid of dipping their foot in the sea, they didn't know that God was going to set up a path for them. It was Yehuda that had that faith and had that preeminence. When Sefer Shoftim starts, the first tribe to go into war is Yehuda. Yehuda Ya'aleh Rishonah. And finally, just going back to another reference to Hanukkah, we know the laning from Hanukkah. Who was the first tribe to bring the presents to the Mikdash, to the Mishkan? Nachshon ben Aminadav Batei Yehuda. So Ibn Ezra cites those examples of preeminence to refute the interpretation that we're talking here about kingship. So that's again rejected by Ramban. What Ramban does say, however, is that there's an implication in this statement that there's a nevuah, there's a prophecy coming from Yaakov. And the prophecy is that another tribe would rule over Israel before David HaMelech, and this would be Shaul. And then he goes into why Shaul was appointed. We come now directly to Barbara's question. What was the point of Shaul's temporary kingship and why was it terminated? So Jeffrey, if you've got Sefer Hoshea, and Johnny, if you can bring it up on the screen, Sefer Hoshea, Perek Yud Gimel, chapter 13, verses 10 and 11.
There we go, it's on the screen for you.
I will be, where is your king? Now let him save you in all your cities and your judges concerning whom you said, give me a king and princes. I gave you a king with my wrath, and I took him away with my fury.
Says Ramban, this is a reference to Shaul, that I gave you a king in my wrath, and I took him away in my fury. What was my wrath? We've already learned this several chapters ago in Sefer Shmuel. What did the people do that was wrong? Johnny went into great detail about the laws applying to a Jewish king and how, according to many of the Mefarshim, it was a mitzvah to ask for a king. Ramban says that whilst it was a mitzvah, it was the wrong time. It wasn't the appropriate time for a king. Why? Because as we know, Shmuel was performing the service of both a shofet, a navi, and a melech. And when Shmuel complains to Hashem and cries out to Hashem, why are they asking for a king now? They're rejecting me. What's Hashem's response? No, they're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me as the king. You're doing a good job, Shmuel. And I'm furious that they've given, that the people are demanding a king at this point. Therefore, I'll send someone who's not particularly good. And when they get fed up with him, in my anger, I'll get rid of him. So that, according to the Ramban, is both an allusion to the future in Yaakov's prophecy. We see the prophecy actually coming into being from that pasuk in Hosea. And have a look also at Shmuel Aleph, chapter 13, verse 13, which we have learned.
There we go.
Jeffrey, do you want to read that, please?
Yes. Is it 14?
13.
13.
And
Samuel said to Saul, "You've done foolishly. You have not observed the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For now the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever."
Okay. And interestingly, the words of over Israel, it doesn't say Al Yisrael, it says El Yisrael. And according to many of the Mefarshim, this is pointing out the fact that despite Shaul's deficiencies, had he not sinned with the story with Agag Melech Amalek, he might have been able to rule over some of the tribes, perhaps from his mother Rachel. So he would rule over Yosef, Binyamin, Menashe, and Ephraim. Or, suggests the Ramban, he might have been a viceroy under Yehuda. But once he'd sinned with Agag, he totally disqualified himself from being king, which we've already learned.
Interesting. David, can I just ask you this?
Yeah.
First of all, let me just welcome David Coleman, who's just joined us. David has just recently made Aliyah and joined us, and he's there he's just joined the shir. So welcome to you, David. We're just talking about how come Saul became king in the first place, because yesterday's parsha we read that the kings will come from the tribe of Yehuda, and of course Saul was from the tribe of Binyamin. We're discussing that. David Marks is giving us a treatise on the Ramban view on this problem from yesterday's parsha. I've got a question on that, David, if I may. Verse 13 that Jeffrey just read said that had he not messed up, Shaul would have Hashem would have established his kingdom over Israel forever, presumably meaning that it would have been the dynasty would have been from Shaul and not from David. Do we therefore have to assume that the pasuk that in Vayechi was taking into account the fact that somehow or other Yaakov Avinu knew that Shaul would mess up?
This, according to Ramban, is an allusion to a prophecy that Yaakov's having, that there would be a temporary king from another tribe. And he's explaining why there would be a temporary king. And once that temporary king was removed, then in future, a king could only come from Shevet Yehuda. So yes, it's an illusion according to the Ramban.
So that means that Yaakov must have had some kind of inkling that it was only going to be temporary, because he gives the kingship to Yehuda in a permanent way. Lo Yasor Shevet. And Shmuel here is saying that to Shaul, it could have been you. So that means, ergo, that Yaakov somehow must have had some kind of Ruach HaKodesh, I suppose you have to say, that it was only going to be temporary.
Yeah, but we know that the reign from Shevet Yehuda was only going to be temporary as well, and it wasn't going to endure, and that's what the Ramban comes on to next. So carrying on with this Jewish history lesson. So hopefully we dealt with Barbara's question. Let's, if I can, just move on to finish this Ramban's history lesson. The first occasion that he alludes to where there weren't kings from Yehuda after David HaMelech was, as we spoke about before, the time of the division of the kingdom at the death of Shlomo, that you had Yeravam ben Nevat, who was from the tribe of Ephraim, appointed as king of the northern kingdom. And have a look again at Shmuel Bet, chapter 7, verse 16.
Shmuel Bet, chapter 7.
Before we go there, David, that previous statement by Shmuel to Shaul that it could have been him is a bit disingenuous, and everybody knew that it was never going to be him. It's a rather disingenuous thing to say, well, it could have been you, but we always knew it wouldn't be you. It really doesn't. I don't understand the point of saying that.
That was really the point that I was trying to make, but you made it much better, Paul.
Yeah.
Okay. But my mercy shall not depart from him, as I withdrew it from Saul, whom I removed from before you. And your house and your kingdom shall be confirmed forever before you. Your throne shall be established forever.
Okay, so here's the source. It's when David HaMelech asks for permission to build the Bet HaMikdash Harishon, the first Bet HaMikdash, and he's refused by God. But Natan HaNavi gives this assurance to David that now he's become king, it'll never be removed from him, that the Malchut will never be removed from him forever. Now let's go back to Sefer Hosea, which again, just to remind you, Hosea is a very early Navi. He's a Navi from the northern kingdom who is giving his Musashir, his Tochacha, his rebuke against the northern kingdom. Have a look at Hosea chapter 8, verse 4.
There you go.
They set up a king, but not from me. They removed, and I did not know. With their silver and their gold, they made themselves idols, in order that it be cut off.
Okay, so this is referring to making Yeravam ben Nevat the first king of the northern kingdom. The idols of silver and gold referring to the golden calves that were set up at Dan and Bethel, the northern and southern extremes of this kingdom. So here is a historical incident of non-Judean kings. Have a look also in Divrei Hayamim, 2 Chronicles, chapter 13, Pasuk 5.
What chapter, David?
Chapter 2 Chronicles 13, 5.
There we go.
Referring to the same event.
Should you not know that the Lord, the God of Israel, gave the kingdom to David over Israel forever, to him and to his sons, with a covenant of salt?
Okay, and this covenant of salt is similar to the covenant of salt that was given to the Kohanim forever. Okay, so again, an allusion or a historical fact brought down by Divrei Hayamim that what was done by Achijah, who proclaimed Yeravam ben Nevat as king, was a terrible sin. So that's the next instance in Jewish history that the Ramban points out, where kings from other tribes were appointed against God's will. Then I mentioned a couple of weeks ago that this particular Ramban is very topical for Hanukkah, because he next goes into the Hasmonean kings, the Hashmonaim, and he emphasizes the fact that they were Tzadikim Gemurim, they were absolute righteous people. But nevertheless, 4 out of the 5 sons of Matityahu died in future battles against the Greeks. Why do they die? Because according to the Ramban, they weren't from the tribe of Yehuda. We'll see in a minute which tribe they're from and why they're specifically punished. So they might have been Tzadikim Gemurim, but because they weren't from the tribe of Yehuda, tragedy ensued. Then he gives the example of the later Hashmonaim kings, just before the rule of Herod. And again, those later Hashmonaim kings, they were all Kohanim. So they came from Shevet Levi. They shouldn't have been kings. And not only were they unrightful kings, but also they conferred with the Sadokim, with the Sadducees, who, remember, rejected the idea of Torah Sheba al Peh. And according to the Ramban, this led to bringing in the Romans, and we all know what the tragic result of that was. And he says, if anything, the tragedy at the time of the Hashmonaim kings was worse than the tragedy of appointing Yeravam ben Nevat as the king, the first king of the northern kingdom, because what ensued with the Hashmonaim kings was total annihilation at the hands of Rome. He ends up, this Ramban, stating what was the actual sin of the Hashmonaim kings and what's the source of it. As we mentioned before, the Hashmonaim kings were all Kohanim, which was absolutely prohibited, not only because they weren't from Shevet Levi, but have a look now at Devarim, chapter 18, verse 1.
Again, while you're going there, David, can I take you back?
Yeah.
You talk about Yerovam and how it was a great sin. This shouldn't have happened, but actually it was predicted to him that it would happen, that God would hand in the 10 tribes. It was predicted by a prophet.
And maybe it was, maybe the prophet should have been aware of the outcome of choosing a king who's not from Shevet Yehuda. Alternatively,
but it says God was giving him the 10 tribes. It didn't say that they would be rendered away from it. Hashem would give him the 10 tribes.
Okay, was this a false prophecy? Was it a prophet? Okay. The other interesting thing is which tribe are the kings of the northern kingdom from?
Generally from Ephraim.
Who is from?
Yosef.
Yosef. So the northern kingdom is Yosef. The southern kingdom is Yehuda.
And of course, we have very many references, don't we, to Ephraim as being dear to HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Correct.
Ephraim. I mean, we sing it ad nauseam on the Yomim Noraim. And Ephraim, of course, was the chosen son of Yosef, and he becomes the symbol of the northern kingdom altogether.
Okay, and we've also got this concept of Mashiach ben David and Mashiach ben Yosef.
Yes, and of course, if you remember when we learned together the Haftorah, where it spoke about the coming together of the Shevet Yehuda and Shevet Ephraim. I think it's from Zechariah, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on that. but it talks about the merging of the staff of Yehuda and the staff of Ephraim into one. And of course, that is the reunification.
Exactly. Last week's Haftarah, Vayigash.
Right. Okay. I knew I'd seen it somewhere.
Yeah.
We learned it together many times ago.
Okay. So let's go back. What's the source of not appointing kings from who are Kohanim? So right at the beginning of the Tanakh, when Johnny was first discussing the appointment of Shaul, he referred us to what's known as Parashat HaMelech, the second parasha in Seder in Shoftim, in the Seder of Shoftim, which deals with all of the rules of appointing a king, what qualities he had to have, what he wasn't allowed, many wives, many horses, etc., etc. And now look, Jeffrey, at Deuteronomy chapter 18, Pasuk Aleph.
There we go.
The Levitic Kohanim, the entire tribe of Levi, shall have no portion or inheritance with Israel. The Lord's fire offerings and his inheritance they shall eat.
Okay, there's a Yerushalmi in Horayot, which Ramban quotes, and the Ramban says the Yerushalmi says that because this pasuk that you've just read, Jeffrey, follows immediately on from Parashat HaMelech that we spoke about a couple of seconds ago. The juxtaposition of the two is the source that we are not allowed to appoint kings from who are Kohanim. And this was the chet, this was the sin of the Hasmonean kings.
There on the screen for you is the previous chapter, immediately before what Jeffrey just read. And as you can see, this is about what the king may or may not do. He may not acquire many horses. He can't take many wives. This is all about the king. And then straight away, chapter 18, the next chapter, we're told. And of course, remember, by the way, that the chapters are nothing to do with us. The chapters are an artificial separation created by Christian scholars. So the fact that it's a new chapter should not make any difference to us. Basically, the Parashat HaMelech, the end of chapter 17, beginning of chapter 18, runs seamlessly one into the other, and the juxtaposition is very clear.
Okay, let's just wrap this topic up with something I found yesterday, not in the Ramban, but it's the Gemara in Masechet Yoma, which discusses why the kingdom of Shaul didn't endure. Says the Gemara there, the biggest problem with Shaul was that he didn't have any skeletons in his cupboard. There was no tarnishing from previous family members. There was nothing there. And says the Gemara, that is a negative attribute of a king, because the fact that he's not got any skeletons, he can turn around and become very, very haughty. And this was one of Shaul's problems, his haughtiness, as opposed to the first king that came from Yehuda, David HaMelech. No king could have had more skeletons in his cupboard than David HaMelech. He's descended on the one side from an incestuous relationship between Lot and his daughters. On the other side, he's got the skeleton in his cupboard of the relationship between Yehuda and Tamar. So he's got plenty to hide. Similarly, the second king, Shlomo, he is the result of the union between David and Bathsheba. So plenty of skeletons there. Look at the actual name of Yehuda and what Hebrew word we see from the word Yehuda, which reflects his personality, as we saw in the parasha in the last 2 or 3 weeks.
Toda.
Toda.
Hoda'ah. Hoda'ah.
Hoda'ah. Or how about modeh, to admit? Okay, to do teshuvah, to admit that he's done something wrong. And this, says the Gemara, is the quality that we need in a king. Someone who's prepared to accept when he's done wrong, to know that he has got skeletons in the cupboard, both his own skeletons and skeletons from family history, as opposed to someone who's got no skeletons, admits he's done nothing wrong. And that's one of Shaul's problems, particularly early on in his life. He can't admit his mistakes. And that's why the kings are descended from Yehuda rather than from Binyamin.
Great. Just a little thing on the word, by the way. Those of you who are part of the Gemara Shir will remember that word modeh. Where did we use that word modeh in the Gemara Shir last week? Anyone remember? David, tell us.
Modeh b'miktzat.
Modeh b'miktzat. Remember, as somebody who admits that he owes partial debt, he has to make an oath about the rest. Remember, somebody comes along and says, you owe me 100 quid. He says, no, I don't. I only owe you 50. Well, then he has to make an oath on the other 50. So we had that same expression, modeh b'miktzat. David, thank you for that. Any questions to David before we finish off chapter 17, which I'll go back to on the screen in a minute? Any questions for David on that extremely thorough answer to Barbara's question? You got more than you bargained for there, Barbara, when you asked that question. That was excellent, excellent, David.
Yes, correct, David. I just want to say thank you so much, David. It's unbelievable, really. And I have a very frivolous question, extremely frivolous, and I'm sorry to lower the tone. Does the fact that you're still wearing a Chelsea shirt mean you have emunah and bitachon? Apologies.
Okay. We will now move back swiftly to Shmuel Aleph, chapter 17, which is where we were before David told us about the Ramban, answering Barbara's question. We are right at the end of this chapter, and we're going to finish this chapter now. But if you remember, the other question that we had at the end of last week's shiur was Pasuk 54. It's on the screen for you now. Jeffrey, if you could read chapter 17, verse 54.
David took the head of the Philistine and eventually brought it to Jerusalem, and his weapons he put in his tent.
Okay, that was brilliantly read. Now, Jeffrey, you have noticed, had his head down when he was reading that because he was reading it from the Art Scroll translation. And now I'd like you to read it, Jeffrey, from the screen, please. 54.
And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, and his weapons he put in his tent. So
where did the Art Scroll differ from the screen?
Eventually.
Right, let's have a look in the Hebrew. Vayikach David et Rosh HaPlishti. And David took the head of the Philistine. We're talking about Goliath, of course. Vayevi'ehu Yerushalayim. And he brought it to Yerushalayim. Ve'et Kelav, and his weapons, his Sam ba'aholo, he placed in his tent. Can anybody there see the Hebrew word eventually? Don't bother looking, because it isn't there. Okay, so why did the art scroll seek to insert an extra word where there is not one? It's one of our just to let David Coleman know, it's one of our one of my pet hobbies is to dissect the art scroll translation and find out what they're really after. And this is a good example. So why does the art scroll seek to add in an extra word eventually? Well, it's tied up with the question that we asked last week, and that is, David took the head of the Philistine. Let's just go back a couple of psukim. Verse 51, Jeffrey, please.
David ran and stood by the Philistine. He took Goliath's sword and drew it from its sheath, having already killed him, and he cut off his head with it. The Philistines saw that their hero was dead, and they ran away. Okay,
stop there. We spoke last week about having already killed him. It's not what it says. And that was another insertion because there was a machloket as to how he died. Did Goliath die by the stone from David's slingshot, or did the stone from the slingshot just stun him, knock him out over to the ground, and then David chopped his head off and he killed him? That was what we spoke about last week. But either way, his head was chopped off. And then verse 54, David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem. What was the problem with that? We asked this question last week and we answered the question that what was wrong with it was that Jerusalem at this stage was not the capital city of Israel. In fact, it was not even ruled over by Israel. Who was in charge of Jerusalem at that stage? Anybody?
Jebusites.
The Jebusites, the Yevusim. It was a Yevusi city. So what would David be taking this head to a Yevusi city for? And it's a pasuk here which needed explanation. And Art Scroll has inserted that word for us to explain it. David took the head of the Philistine and eventually brought it to Jerusalem. What he did with it and how he preserved it for all that time, because it was a very significant period of time between chopping his head off and David capturing Jerusalem and making it his capital city. So presumably they must have preserved it in some way, otherwise it would have been a bit manky by the time he got to take it to Jerusalem. But he couldn't have taken it to Jerusalem. Here, this pasuk is out of, I nearly said out of order. I don't mean out of order in meaning it's not right. I mean out of chronological order. This pasuk refers to sometime in the future, David, when he had his capital city, put Goliath's head in Jerusalem. Now, that shouldn't surprise us, because that was the thing that you did in those days. It was a spoil of victory, spoils of war. It was the victory emblem, if you like. The head of the king that you have defeated was demonstrating that you had defeated this king. So it was very common in those days for victorious leaders to display the head of the defeated leader in their capital city.
And Shaul did that. Didn't Shaul do that as well? Well, he wasn't told not to. I think he did it. Was it Shaul recently? When they went up through the valleys, what was that? Went to the valleys and they fought them at the top of the valleys.
I don't remember him taking the head.
Shimshon, was it? Oh. It must have been. I'll try and find it.
There are many examples. Yeah. I don't remember Shaul doing it, but there are many examples. Gidon did it, but I don't remember Shaul doing it. We'll have a look a bit later on, maybe. So the second thing is, and his weapons he put in his tent. Okay, his weapons he put in his tent. What weapons are we talking about here?
Sword and its bow and arrow, sword and a slingshot.
No, it's talking about Goliath's weapons.
Goliath.
Sword, spear,
Goliath's
javelin.
sword, that's right. And we see that in a later chapter in Shmuel, which is over here, chapter 21. We see here, after the famous story, we'll get to it in a few months' time, chapter 21. But what we will see, the famous story of David and Jonathan, which we read on a Machar Chodesh, the Haftarah of Machar Chodesh, meaning when Rosh Chodesh is a Sunday, there is a special Haftarah that we read, and that Haftarah is the story of David and Jonathan. We will come to it in a few months here, well, probably in a few weeks, actually. It's coming up. And the story there is that, of course, briefly, spoilers coming up here now, for those of you that don't know the story, Saul becomes very paranoid about David, seeks to kill him. Jonathan, the son of Saul, is David's closest friend and seeks to save him. And there is a whole business about David not turning up to the meal of the king on Rosh Chodesh. And that's why this event of David and Jonathan takes place on the day before Rosh Chodesh, Machar Chodesh, the day after being Rosh Chodesh. And that is why this is the Haftarah for Rosh Chodesh being on a Sunday. After that story, David realizes that Shaul is out to kill him. And so what does he do? He runs away. He runs away and he arrives at this place. Anybody know the name of the city where he arrives?
Is it Nov?
It is Nov. There we go. Chapter 21, verse 2, Jeffrey, on the screen for you.
And David came to Nov.
No, for hiding him. Yeah.
To Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech came trembling toward David and said, "Why are you alone and no one with you?"
So he comes to this city, Nov, and he's on his own. And the reason he's on his own is because he's running away. And so if you have a look over here, verse 9 now, Jeffrey, please.
And David said to Ahimelech, "And if there is here in your possession a spear or a sword, for neither my sword nor my weapons have I taken in my hand, for the king's business was urgent." And the priest said, "The sword of Goliath the Philistine, who you slew in the valley of the Terebinth, behold, it is wrapped in a garment behind the ephod."
Oh, so that's where it was. Okay.
If you wish to take that for yourself, take it, for there is none beside it here. And David said, "There is none like it. Give it to me."
So let's go back to our pasuk here, our troublesome pasuk. And David took the head of the Philistine. Let's use the Art Scroll's helpful insertion, and eventually brought it to Jerusalem. And his weapons, what does it say in the Art Scroll, Jeffrey? Does it say, and his weapons he eventually put in his tent? Because it should.
Eventually is in brackets, Johnny.
Ah, beautiful. Eventually is in brackets to tell us that that is Art Scroll's helpful insertion and is not a literal translation. Does it have an eventually when he puts his weapons in his tent as well?
Yeah. And eventually brought it to Jerusalem, and his weapons he put in his tent.
Okay, so the eventually has to go on both parts then, because he didn't take Goliath's weapon straight away and put it in his tent. Otherwise, it couldn't have been in Nov when he ran away to Nov, and Ahimelech couldn't have given it to him because it would have been back in David's tent. So the explanation of verse 54 can only be that this verse is out of chronological order, and it's one of the proofs that is brought by the Mepharshim that the person who redacted Sefer Shmuel did not write it contemporaneously. It was written sometime later. Yes, Jeffrey?
There is an asterisk after he put it in his tent. And the asterisk, the explanation for the asterisk is he brought Goliath's weapons home to Bethlehem, and in brackets redact, as mementos of his triumph. Goliath's sword, however, was stored in the sanctuary at Nob, as related in chapter 21:10.
There we go. That's 21:10 is what you've just read out. So there you are. Why was the sword? 1 second, Johnny. I'll come to you in a sec. Why was the sword of Goliath, do you think, put in the temple at Nov? It's not the kind of thing you would really want to put in a temple. I wouldn't have thought to put a weapon of war in the temple. The temple is meant to be a place of a sanctuary. That's what we call it. I don't think that's a very nice thing to put in there. Any suggestions, anyone? Yes,
Just it was a trophy.
I think that it was a sanctuary is only a sanctuary for people who respect the sanctuary. And for enemies, they wouldn't respect a sanctuary. So if someone is in the sanctuary, they have to defend themselves if they're being attacked by enemies. Therefore, there's the sword.
Okay, I'll buy that. And I'll also buy Johnny's explanation that it was a trophy. I'm sure that's the case. And of course, that's why eventually his head was brought to Jerusalem. We're not told that it was necessarily brought to the temple because there wasn't a temple at that time. It hadn't been built. And the Mishkan was not yet in Yerushalayim. So the sword gets put into the temple at Nov, and it's handy for when David goes running there, and Achimelech can give him this sword when he is running away from Shaul. So, as I said before, this is a pasuk that the Mefarshim use as proof that it wasn't Shmuel himself that wrote the book of Shmuel Aleph. There are some Mefarshim that say it was Shmuel Aleph. Those who disagree with that use this pasuk as a proof to say it couldn't have been Shmuel who wrote it, because Shmuel was not alive when David took the head of the Plishti to Yerushalayim. Yes, David.
Can I throw a spanner in the works? Because I erroneously thought the last time you gave the share that this was the first of Yerushalayim in the Tanakh, explicit mention of Yerushalayim, and it's not. The Dad Mikra points out that there are two places called Yerushalayim, and this wasn't the Jebusite city of Yerushalayim, it was a different Yerushalayim. Now, I found that very difficult. Who's got the Steinsaltz Tanakh? Johnny's got it.
I've got the Steinsaltz Tanakh, yeah.
Have a look at the first chapter of Shoftim.
Yeah.
Right.
8.
Shoftim Aleph, verse 8, okay. Let's get it on the screen for everyone as well so you can see what we're talking about. Shoftim, chapter Aleph, verse 8. There we go. Right, Jeffrey, read that out while I'm finding the Steinsaltz.
And the children of Judah fought against Jerusalem and captured it, and smote it with the edge of the sword, and set the city on fire. And afterward the children of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the mountains of the south and of the lowland. And Judah went to the Canaanites that dwelt in Hebron. Now the name of Hebron formerly had been Kiriath Arba. And they smote Sheshai and Heman and Talmai.
Okay, let me read you out the Steins out now. The children of Judah made war against Jerusalem, and they captured it, smote it by the sword. The victory over Jerusalem was not complete, as the tribe of Judah failed to capture the large Jebusite fortress. This fortress would eventually be conquered by David. Shmuel Bet, chapter 5. According to one tradition, Jerusalem was divided into two cities of the same name. The plural form of the Hebrew name Yerushalayim alludes to this fact. Rabbeinu Bachya says that, and as does the plural form of Betocham in reference to Jerusalem. In Jerusalem and all the house of Israel, among whom Betocham they are. That's it from Yechezkel. If so, it is possible that at this stage only one of the two cities was captured. Okay, that's interesting. So then that would possibly explain, let's go back to Shmuel Aleph, there it would possibly explain that David took the head of the Philistine to Jerusalem, but I'm very doubtful over that at all, because at this stage, David is not the king, Shaul is the king, Shaul's palace is not in Jerusalem, there would be no reason for David to take it to Jerusalem, even the partially captured Jerusalem.
Let's say it's symbolic, the fact that David's ancestor, Yehuda, as I spoke about earlier, and this chapter in Shoftim is one of the proofs Ibn Ezra gives for Yehuda's ascendancy, that it's Yehuda who fights the first battle in Eretz Yisrael after the death of Yehoshua, and it's Yehuda who captures Yerushalayim, sets it on fire. Maybe there are these two cities of Yerushalayim, as Radak suggests, and maybe it was purely symbolic that David HaMelech took Goliath's head there to establish the fact that his ancestor Yehuda had been the first tribe to capture the first part of the city of Yerushalayim.
Okay,
Mikra, not me.
I can understand where they're coming from, but I'll tell you why I'm not buying it.
It solves the problem.
It does solve the problem. It doesn't solve the problem of the tent, but I suppose that's his kalim is all the other kalim apart from his sword. Well, I'm not really buying that either. Why would he want anything else other than the sword? But the real reason I'm not buying it, David, is this. Imagine that you are David and you've got this head of Goliath and you take it to your own stronghold that your tribe have captured, as you have just described. That is an act of incredible chutzpah towards the king. Now, you could then turn around and say to me, well, it's not surprising, therefore, that Shaul had it in for David because that's what he did. But we don't see David behaving in that way. We see David being very conciliatory towards Shaul. He calls him my lord. That would be an act of rebellion, I think, against the king. It would be Mored B'Malchus, and he would be Chayav Misa. I have to admit that on this occasion, even though it sticks in the craw sometimes, I think the Art Scrolls insertion of eventually is the most suitable explanation. Although I think it's rather, I think it's a clever explanation of the Radak there. But I don't think it really fits. I think that this was an insertion. This pasuk was inserted later. One of the explanations about who wrote Sefer Shmuel is that it was Natan Hanavi, Natan the prophet, who took over from Shmuel as the prophet, who was the prophet in the time of King David. He would have been very well placed to have seen that. And one of them, the explanations is that Shmuel Aleph was a composite, Shmuel Aleph and Bet was a composite book written by various different people at various different times, started off by Shmuel and redacted and added to by others. And I think that this pasuk here, for me, is quite persuasive of that. I think that it means that David eventually took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem. I don't think that the redact's explanation is fitting with David's behavior pattern at this stage towards Shaul.
Rabbi Steinsaltz says, Johnny, Rabbi Steinsaltz adds a note. He said, instead of eventually, he said, probably a long time later.
Okay. Yeah,
then subsequently transferred the various stuff into his tent subsequently.
Yeah, so Rav Steinsaltz is on the same page there. Let's just finish the chapter. I know we're out of time, but let's just finish the chapter. It's just a few psukim, and then please God, next week we can start the next chapter. So verse 55, Jeffrey.
And when Saul saw David going out towards the Philistine, he said to Abner, the general of his army, "Whose son is this youth?" Abner. And Abner said, "By your life, O king, I know not." Johnny, should I read it from Art Scroll?
Whichever you prefer. Yeah, read it from Art Scroll, and then we can see if there's any differences we can follow on the screen.
When Saul had seen David going forth towards the Philistine, he said to Abner, the minister of the army, "Abner, whose son is this lad?" And Abner replied, "By your life, O king, I do not know." So the king instructed him, "You ask whose son this youth is." So when David returned from smiting the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, while the head of the Philistine was still in his hand. Saul said to him, "Whose son are you, young man?" David replied, "The son of your servant, Jesse the Bethlehemite."
Right, okay. Well, there you have it, David. David is very courteous to Saul. He describes himself as the son of your servant. He's not being provocative. He's still got Goliath's head in his hand at this stage. So I think that helps us there. But what's the problem with those four psukim, by the way?
The king knew exactly who he was.
Well, you would think so, wouldn't you? Because, Michael?
Because he played the harp for him, and secondly, didn't he offer him his armor before he fought the Philistine as well? So he knew exactly who he was.
It's a strange thing, isn't it? He knew who he was. He'd been playing the harp for him for a considerable period of time by this stage, so he knew who he was. And he also knew who his brothers were, because these three of his brothers were his soldiers. So, of course, all the Mefarshim ask this question: what on earth is going on here? There are two major answers, which we'll just say very briefly. First answer given is that Saul was such a busy king, then so many people went in and out of his palace that he wasn't quite sure exactly who he was. I'm not sure I'm buying that, but that's Michael Krauss is not buying it either. But that's what is said. And the second explanation, which I think is a better explanation. Well, you have to wait. I'm in the middle of giving a shear. The second explanation, which is more understandable, I think, is that the king sees him and he sees this tremendous bravery. He sees him discard the armor, and he says to him, "Wow, I know who this lad is. This lad's my harpist. But whose son is he? Where does he get the courage from? Where does he get the faith from? He must have some significant lineage here, which has enabled him to step up when nobody else was stepping up." So he wasn't actually asking specifically exactly who is this person. He knows who he is. What he's asking is, where did he get this this greatness from to enable him to go out in front of Goliath and to challenge him. Yes, David.
There is the third explanation that the 2 chapters are out of chronological order, and chapter 17 should come before chapter 16, and there are many textual proofs to that.
Yeah, that's
Rabbi Bazak.
Again, we can talk about that. I was going to talk about that today, but of course the Ramban took us a bit longer than I had expected, which is fine, no problem. We don't have any time or speed restrictions here. Perhaps we'll talk about that before we start the next chapter, how the third explanation that David has just mentioned, which is that there are 2 things going along in parallel here, chapter 16 and 17, and parallels the previous chapters, which were also a bit contradictory as well earlier on in chapters 13 and 14. So we'll talk a little bit about that next time. But we're well out of time, and I need to go by the looks of it. So any questions before we call it a day today?
Johnny, I won't be around on Wednesday or next Sunday, unfortunately.
Okay, we will.
Or indeed the following Wednesday, but
we'll look forward to your return in due course, Jeffrey. Have a
Johnny won't be here next Wednesday either.
No, I won't be here next Wednesday either. Okay. Quite right, Michael.
Okay, good.
Any questions before I stop the recording?
I think Rabbi Steinsaltz says that Saul asked the question, who is this lad? You know, he played the harp for him, but he promised that whoever killed Goliath would become like his son-in-law, etc. Then he wanted to see his lineage properly.
Yeah. You wanted to know the yichus of it.
The yichus, exactly, yes.
Yeah. Okay, fine. In that case, I shall wish you all a Shavua Tov. Tomorrow night, Tefillah here in Shul and on Zoom.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Everyone.